What's going on, fellas? So today I'm trying something a little different here, and I'm following a script for today's video because so far we've covered very fundamental and easy to grasp concepts that anyone who spends any time making progress in the gym can grasp pretty quickly. But moving forward, we're going to be talking about things that I want to put a little more nuance behind whenever I make statements about these things. And it also just goes into why I'm making these videos. It's partly to help me challenge my ability to articulate these ideas and further cement my understanding of these concepts. And on top of that, I figured it'd be helpful to contribute to the pool of content on YouTube and just give another resource for anyone who's looking to get into the gym. My channel can be another avenue for good training content instead of finding content from someone who's trying to sell them a program that won't get them results or is trying to trick them into believing something that's part of their dogmatism. I'm trying to make sure there's less of that and more stuff that actually helps you get results in the gym. So with that out of the way, let's get right into it. So far, we have discussed the need for progressive overload in your training so that we can chase the adaptations we are looking for, as well as to increase the challenge of training so that it continues to be effective, as well as discuss some of the most practical progression models for the general lifter. Before we get into some of the details about building a training split like frequency, splitting our volume across sessions, knowing what exercises to pick and where to put them, choosing rep ranges, and all the other tangible and concrete training details, I wanted to cover something that isn't a tangible variable in training but matters the most. If you're not thinking about this aspect of your training, you're not going to go anywhere with lifting, regardless of how much thought you put into finding the perfect training split or the perfect progression scheme. And that is because when we are talking about training and choosing an exercise, putting weight on the bar, and planning to do X amount of sets for X amount of reps, all that we are actually talking about is getting a stimulus out of our training. All of these aforementioned variables only seek to describe the quantity and type of stimulus we are applying, but they say nothing about the quality of that same stimulus. If we only look at training through these written variables, we are missing the bigger picture. Every training protocol is just an arranged way of performing repetitions of movements to derive a stimulus, and to ensure that we get a high quality stimulus, we need to ensure that our repetitions are high quality. Knowing exactly what makes for high quality execution is more of an intuition than exact science. The same exercises can be performed many different ways depending upon your goals with the movement. Today, I want to share with you a few things you can start doing with your training that will help you develop a seasoned lifter's intuition for proper exercise execution, so you can start getting results today that will carry you towards your goals. The first thing we need to be doing is to have a purpose behind what we are doing in the gym and to base our exercise selection for its ability to fulfill a specific function that brings us to our goal. If what I just said seems like too much effort, the alternative is to have no training plan and just do whatever you think of on the spot. A plan is always going to be more productive than on-the-fly decision making. Once we have chosen a goal, we can then assess each exercise as something that works in favor of our goal, something that doesn't really add to our goal or detract from it, and something that detracts from the goal. It's essentially a needs versus wants analysis you're using to fine-tune what's in your training plan. This is a step in the right direction, but it doesn't cover all the bases. It's entirely possible to pick the right tool for the job and use it the wrong way. You can bring a hammer to frame a house, and if you swing with a floppy wrist, the house is never going to get built. In the same way, you can pick excellent exercises for hypertrophy or strength, but if you perform the exercise improperly, you're never going to become a house. Once we have decided what our intention is with any given movement, we need to hold on to it firmly as we execute the movement. Your ability to do so is the difference between moving with intent versus flopping your body around to move a weight with any means necessary. You don't get big delts by lateral raising as much weight as humanly possible. You get big delts by lateral raising with the intention of making sure it's the delts that are doing the work. Likewise, you won't build an impressive squat if all your work and sets are performed with half-assed efforts when you aren't even hitting depth, you don't root your feet into the floor, the shelf on your back sucks, and you have no brace in your core at all. Like Bald Omni-Man says, if you pile good on top of good, you're going to get good. You pile dookie on top of dookie, you're going to get dookie. Our reps count only when we decide we're going to make them count. Now, you can pick the right exercises, you can perform them with good form, and still be missing out on gains if you don't push yourself hard enough. Which that is probably the biggest issue I see when I walk into most gyms. Muscle is not an easy thing to put on. That's why it's so damn impressive. It's a very resource-expensive addition to the body that's only going to grow once we give it enough of a reason to. And a lot of people are spending their time in the gym in a way that does not give their body a reason to put on muscle. Each set of an exercise should be seen as a moment that you will be pushing that muscle or movement pattern to its absolute limit or close to the edge. That is the kind of intensity that will send a stimulus to the body that will make it want to grow. This is why having the intention of how the movement should be performed is so essential. When the reps start to get really tough, your subconscious will tell you to do things that make moving the weights easier, but are usually counterproductive to what our goals with the movement are. Your body is just trying to get the hard shit over with. It doesn't necessarily know you're trying to grow your biceps. These are the kinds of mistakes that I made frequently when I was new to the gym. I would use weights that were objectively way too heavy for where I was at the time, and not think a lick about how I was making the weight move. Lifting like this didn't do crap for the muscles I was trying to grow because I wasn't using those muscles to move the weight. I was using my hips, my back, my knees, and every other thing that wasn't actually something that could grow to move the weight. Lifting with such little intention is less than unproductive. It's counterproductive. You're taking stress off of the muscle and putting it on your joints, increasing your risk of injury for even less of a return out of your time invested in training. Now, to develop the intuition of a seasoned lifter who knows how to get the most out of every exercise, you'll need to start implementing a few habits in your training. The first thing you need to develop a quality over quantity mindset is to cut the fluff out of your program. If you are properly taxing the target muscles and truly pushing yourself near muscular failure, you will not need to do much of that to be getting results. You need to think of each set as an absolute maximum effort attempt where you use everything that muscle has in it to make the weight move appropriately. How many maximum effort attempts do you think you have in you? This isn't a game to see who's hardest with their training. If you're being honest with yourself, the answer should be not that many, because a maximum effort shouldn't be replicable for 50 sets per muscle group per week. There are, of course, guys who go against the rule that I just laid out because they're more advanced and can handle higher volumes at this high effort threshold that I'm talking about. But as a general rule of thumb, it's better to assume that you're not that guy if you haven't been serious and consistent with diligent progressive overload training for at least 5 years. I'm not at that point. Another habit you should start doing is to record yourself lifting as a means of auditing your technique. This habit is important for developing the skill that is good lifting technique, because that's a skill largely based on the intuition of what good form looks like and feels like. If you take the time to film and watch yourself lift, you'll start to understand the relationship between how your body moves and what you feel working during an exercise. It's a tactic for developing mind-muscle connection. If you never take the time to see what your lifting looks like, you can't ever know for sure if your form is as bad or good as you think it is. Concrete evidence is always going to beat just guessing. While we're on the topic of good technique, it's important to note that good technique is not a subject where one size fits all. The thing all good lifting techniques have in common comes down to fundamental principles. If you're using good technique, you should be maximizing your stability within the constraints of the movement, maximizing tension on the target muscle if the goal is development, or maximizing your ability to move the weight if the goal is performance, and making our reps look as consistent as possible. You'll want to watch other people online or in person lift and ask yourself if they are using good or bad technique so you can start to discern between the commonalities their technique has with other lifters' technique, which is also good, but just happens to look different. This is going to help you identify what you should mimic in other lifters versus what is better suited for them because of their own build, injury history, and muscular weaknesses. The more you can recognize these details in other people, the better you get at seeing them within yourself. The last tip I have for you guys today is to be present and in the moment during your workouts. Instead of spending your rest intervals on your phone, you can update your training log with whatever numbers you hit and then start thinking about how the last set moved and what you can do on the next set to make it move even better or more productive. Ask yourself a quick series of questions after each set, such as, how did that feel? Was that discomfort I experienced a joint pain that I need to stop, or was it just my muscles? Am I hitting the target muscles? What can I do to make this weight move better? Is there a cue I could focus on to make my positioning better? Questions of that nature. The point here isn't to overanalyze every single minutia of movement your body is making. Good technique exists on a spectrum, just like everything else on life. The goal with what I'm saying here is to put more thought into your exercise execution so you can get better at recognizing where your technique is on the spectrum. You don't know what you don't know. Putting just a little bit of thought in between sets on how to improve the next set takes just a tiny bit of effort in the moment, and it pays off huge dividends in the long run. Now, I want to wrap this conversation up with just 2 more talking points. The first one being that to know the existence of concepts like proper exercise selection, execution, and intensity is much easier than it is to actually apply those concepts. That's just another way of saying all these things are a skill that you'll constantly be developing and improving throughout your lifting journey. It takes time to get better at lifting weights, so don't be hard on yourself and insecure just because you don't have everything quite figured out yet. It takes time to develop the skills and intuition of a seasoned lifter that knows what makes the difference between a good and a bad exercise. So don't be so hard on yourself for not knowing everything right now and constantly intimidated by the idea of looking like a fool in the gym. We are all learning things as we move forward in our own journeys, and learning things requires making mistakes. If you are too worried of making mistakes, you will never progress forward. Each mistake is a potential stepping stone that can bring you a little more knowledge about what makes lifting technique high or low quality, but these mistakes only educate you when you're making an effort to pay attention to them. Finally, I want to say that progressive overload and your training plan as a whole only matters when it's filled with training sessions where each rep of each exercise is bringing you quality stimulus. The perfect workout plan or the perfect exercise you've been looking for does not exist. There are only better and worse training plans for the individual depending upon where you're at in your lifting journey. The one thing that all training plans are going to have in common is that they all depend on your willingness to put intentional effort into your time in the weight room. So before you start looking for the next progression scheme or training split that will change everything, I implore you to focus on what you're doing in the gym now that will get you better results going forward. So that's everything for today's video, guys. I hope you liked it. I'm thinking next I'm going to talk about the relationship between some training variables that determine what your training split's going to look like. A little brief introduction into that next video. All training splits is a way to distribute volume and intensity and frequency. And you decide what those variables will look like depending upon your goals with your training split. And you can't just max all those stats out. There's a trade-off between each one. So I'm going to watch some other content creators' videos talking about training frequency, intensity, and volume. before I start writing my own thoughts on the matter and getting to working on that script for the next video. But till then, guys, I hope you learned something today. Let me know if you had a bit trouble understanding something that I said in this video, or you think I could have covered it more. And if there's something you want me to talk about, just drop it down in the comments. And until then, guys, y'all have a good one.